The eternal darkness of space pressed against the reinforced viewports of Vesper 3, a mining outpost clinging to existence on the fringes of the asteroid belt. Inside the station, life mirrored that darkness, harsh, isolated, and unforgiving. The recycled air carried the perpetual scent of metal and machine oil, punctuated by the constant hum and occasional grinding of overtaxed machinery that kept everyone alive. Resources were scarce on Vesper 3, and that scarcity had shaped its inhabitants. People walked with purpose, eyes down, shoulders hunched against invisible burdens. Conversations were brief, functional exchanges rather than connections. In a place where survival depended on equipment not failing, human warmth had become an unnecessary luxury. Cale Brannigan understood this reality better than most. At 34, he'd spent nearly a decade as a maintenance engineer on the station, his life measured in repair logs and spare parts inventories. His small living unit in Section D was utilitarian: a bed, a workbench cluttered with salvage components, and a single hydroponic shelf where he stubbornly grew basil and mint, small defiances against the sterility of station life. The other residents knew Cale only as the quiet engineer who could coax life back into failing systems long after others had declared them irreparable. Few knew about the family transport accident that had claimed his parents and younger sister 12 years ago, or how that loss had hollowed him out, leaving behind a man who found more comfort in the predictable logic of machines than in the unpredictable nature of human connection. Tonight, Cale's dinner consisted of a standard nutrition bar and synthesized tea, consumed at his workbench while he disassembled a faulty air filter component. His shift had ended 3 hours ago, but sleep rarely came easily, so he worked instead. A notification flashed on his personal tablet. Supply inventory was running low on connector pins and thermal paste. With a sigh, he cleaned his hands and prepared to visit the station's makeshift black market, knowing the official requisition would take weeks to process. The unofficial market occupied a repurposed cargo bay in the station's lower levels. Here, station residents traded salvage parts, contraband comfort items, and information. Security personnel knew about it, but largely turned a blind eye. Even they understood the necessity of this gray economy on a station perpetually short of everything. Cale navigated through the narrow pathways between vendor stalls, nodding occasionally to familiar faces. The lighting here was dimmer than in official areas, creating shadows that concealed as much as they revealed. He had just finished haggling for a set of microcalibrators when movement in a dark corner caught his eye. At first, he thought it might be one of the station's ubiquitous maintenance drones. But the movement was too organic, too hesitant. Stepping closer, he realized it was a person, or something close to a person, huddled in the shadows, clearly trying to avoid attention. She was humanoid, but unmistakably alien. Even in the dim light, Cale could see the subtle, silvery sheen of her skin, like moonlight captured beneath a thin membrane. Her eyes, when they briefly met his, were a deep violet that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Faint, luminescent biological patterns traced across her exposed skin, forearms, and face, pulsing slightly with her breathing. The alien woman's clothes were little more than rags, mismatched pieces of station work uniforms and thermal blankets crudely fashioned into garments. She was painfully thin, her frame suggesting a body that had gone without proper nourishment for too long. As Cale watched, she reached out to retrieve something from the floor, a discarded food wrapper with the barest crumbs remaining, and brought it to her mouth with trembling fingers. All around, station residents gave the alien a wide berth. Some cast disgusted glances her way. Others looked fearful. A security officer at the edge of the market kept casting suspicious glances in her direction, but hadn't approached. The message was clear. She was unwelcome, unwanted, a potential threat to the fragile equilibrium of station life. Cale felt something stir within him, an emotion he hadn't experienced in years. Pity, perhaps, or something deeper, recognition of a fellow outcast. Without fully analyzing his actions, He unwrapped one of his own ration bars and activated its heating element. The smell of warm, artificial cinnamon filled the air around him. He approached her slowly, aware that sudden movements might frighten her. The alien's head snapped up at his approach, her violet eyes widening. She pressed herself further into the corner, hands raised slightly in what Kale recognized as a universal gesture of defense. "It's okay," he said softly, holding out the warm ration bar. "You look hungry. This isn't much, but it's better than food wrappers." She stared at him, then at the offered food, suspicion and desperate hunger warring in her expression. Her gaze darted around, perhaps looking for the trap or the price that would come with accepting his offering. "No strings attached," Kale said, setting the bar down on a crate near her and backing away slightly. "Just food." For several long moments, she didn't move. Then, with a quickness that startled him, she snatched the bar and retreated back to her corner. She sniffed it cautiously before taking a small bite. The moment the food hit her system, her restraint collapsed, and she devoured the rest in desperate, rapid bites. Kale watched, struck by the raw vulnerability of the moment. When was the last time he'd felt so strongly about anything? When was the last time he'd acted on impulse rather than careful calculation? "Do you understand me?" he asked. "Do you have somewhere to go?" The alien woman hesitated, then shook her head slowly. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came out. Instead, she hugged herself tightly, and Kale noticed she was shivering. The station's environmental systems would be cycling into the cold phase soon, a deliberate energy conservation measure that dropped temperatures in public areas to just above freezing during third shift. Over the market speakers, an automated announcement confirmed his concerns. "Attention all personnel. Environmental cycling commences in 15 minutes. Please return to designated habitat zones." The alien woman's shivering intensified, and Kale realized she likely had nowhere to go. Without proper authorization, she wouldn't be able to access any of the climate-controlled areas during the cold cycle. People had died that way before. Unofficial residents, stowaways, or those who simply couldn't afford habitat access fees. A lifetime of caution and self-preservation warred with something deeper, something he'd thought long buried under years of isolation. What was he thinking? Taking in an unauthorized alien could cost him his job, his living unit, possibly even result in criminal charges. She could be dangerous, carrying diseases, or a spy for a competing mining corporation. Yet as he looked at her, alone, afraid, shivering, Kale recognized a reflection of his own solitude, only magnified 100-fold. He'd chosen his isolation. She'd had hers forced upon her. "Come with me," he said abruptly, the words surprising even himself. "I have shelter. It's not much, but it's warm." Her violet eyes widened, uncertainty and hope battling across her expressive face. "The cold cycle is starting soon," he explained, gesturing toward the ceiling where frost was already beginning to form on exposed pipes. "You can't stay here." Understanding dawned in her eyes, followed by cautious gratitude. She rose unsteadily to her feet, keeping her distance from him. Kale noticed she was shorter than he'd initially thought, the top of her head barely reaching his shoulder. "My name is Kale," he said, tapping his chest. Then he gestured to her, raising his eyebrows in question. She hesitated, then touched her own chest. Her voice, when it finally came, was soft and melodic despite its weakness. "Lyra," she said, the R rolling in a way no human tongue could quite replicate. "Lyra," Kale repeated, nodding. "Let's go before security starts clearing the area." He led her through the less-traveled maintenance corridors, avoiding the main thoroughfares where questions might be asked. Lyra followed, silently, her footsteps so light they were nearly inaudible. Twice they had to duck into recessed doorways to avoid passing workers, and each time Kale felt her trembling against him, her fear palpable. By the time they reached his living unit in Section D, Kale was questioning his sanity. What was he doing? This wasn't like him, taking risks, helping strangers, breaking station regulations. Yet something about Lyra's quiet desperation had breached defenses he'd spent years building. The door to his unit slid open with a soft hiss, revealing the sparse interior. "It's safe here," he told her, gesturing for her to enter. "No one will bother you." Lyra stood at the threshold, violet eyes scanning the room with unmistakable wariness. Finally, with visible reluctance, she stepped inside. Cale followed, allowing the door to close behind them. As the lock engaged with a soft click, he was struck by the enormity of what he'd just done. He'd brought an unauthorized alien, a complete stranger, into his private space, violating at least 3 station bylaws in the process. Whatever happened next, life on Vesper 3 would never be the same. The first night was the hardest. Lyra refused to come away from the corner farthest from the door, her violet eyes tracking Cale's every movement like a cornered animal expecting an attack. When he offered her his bed, pointing to it and then to her, she shook her head vigorously. When he tried to approach with a thermal blanket, she pressed herself further into the corner, shoulders hunched protectively. Eventually, Cale simply placed food, water, and the blanket within her reach and retreated to his workbench, deliberately turning his back to show he posed no threat. He tinkered with a broken air purifier, hyper-aware of her presence, yet pretending to be absorbed in his work. Only when the soft sounds of eating reached his ears did he allow himself a small sigh of relief. He slept on his narrow couch that night, positioning himself so that Lyra had a clear path to the door if she wanted to leave. But when morning came, she was still there, huddled under the thermal blanket, watching him with those impossible violet eyes that seemed to look through him rather than at him. Days passed in this strange, silent coexistence. Cale maintained his regular work schedule, securing the door when he left and half expecting to find her gone when he returned. Yet each time, Lyra was still there, gradually claiming a little more space in his small unit. Moving from the corner to the edge of his bed, accepting food directly from his hand rather than waiting for him to set it down and back away. On the 5th day, Cale returned from his shift to find something had changed. The hydroponic shelf where he grew his pitiful basil and mint plants had been rearranged. The plants, which had been struggling despite his best efforts, now stood taller, their leaves greener and more abundant. Lyra sat cross-legged on the floor nearby, watching him anxiously as he examined the transformation. "Did you do this?" he asked, pointing to the plants and then to her. Lyra nodded hesitantly, then made a flowing gesture with her hands. She touched one of the mint leaves gently, and to Cale's astonishment, the plant seemed to lean toward her touch like a pet seeking affection. "Thank you," he said, genuinely moved by this small gift, the first thing she had offered him. They've never looked so healthy. Her lips curved in what might have been a smile, the first he'd seen from her. She reached out tentatively and touched his hand, a fleeting contact that nonetheless sent an unexpected warmth through him. Then she spoke, her voice a melodic whisper. "Thank you, Cale." Hearing his name in her voice, the way it lilted on her alien tongue, affected him more deeply than he could have anticipated. It was the first real acknowledgement of him as a person, not merely a provider of safety and sustenance, but someone worthy of being named. "You're welcome, Lyra," he replied, her name similarly strange yet natural on his lips. That night, Cale told her about his work on the station, describing the endless battle against entropy as systems broke down and were repaired, only to break again. He explained the architecture of Vesper 3, the way it harvested resources from nearby asteroids, the hierarchy of its inhabitants from the administrator levels to the maintenance crews like himself. He carefully avoided any mention of his past, of the family he had lost, though sometimes he would catch Lyra looking at the single holographic image he kept by his bed, for smiling faces frozen in happier times. Lyra absorbed everything with intense interest, her grasp of human language improving daily. She formed simple sentences, asked questions, repeated new words to herself as if committing them to memory. When she didn't have the words, she communicated through gestures or drawings made with a stylus on Cale's tablet. Her artwork was strangely beautiful, flowing, organic lines that somehow conveyed meaning beyond their form. It was on the 10th day that their fragile peace was disrupted. A sharp knock on the door sent Lyra scrambling back to her corner, fear etched on her silvery features. "Brannigan, open up." The voice belonged to Warden Moss, the housing section supervisor known for his rigid enforcement of station regulations. Cale motioned for Lyra to stay hidden and opened the door just enough to see outside. Moss stood there, datapad in hand, flanked by a junior security officer whose hand rested too casually near his stun baton. "Warden Moss," Cale acknowledged, keeping his expression neutral. "What can I do for you?" Moss consulted his datapad with exaggerated scrutiny. "Routine inspection. We've had reports of unauthorized life forms in this section. Possibly a biohazard situation." "Life forms," Cale repeated, feigning confusion. "Like what? A pet? You know those aren't allowed outside the biodome." "Not a pet, Brannigan," Moss said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "An alien. Unregistered, unvaccinated, potentially dangerous. There have been sightings in the lower market. Thin silver thing, eyes like some kind of mutant. Ring any bells?" Cale maintained a carefully blank expression. "I spend most of my time in the maintenance tunnels, Warden. Not much time for the market." "Well, the scanning team picked up anomalous life signs in this sector," Moss pressed. "Standard procedure requires we check all units." Behind Cale, something fell with a soft thud. Moss's eyes narrowed. "What was that?" "Toolkit," Cale said quickly. "I was in the middle of a repair when you knocked." Moss didn't appear convinced. "Step aside, Brannigan. Official inspection." Cale's mind raced. Refusing would only confirm Moss's suspicions, but allowing him inside would expose Lyra. Before he could decide, a shout came from further down the corridor. "Warden Moss, security breach in Section C. All personnel report immediately." The junior officer's comm unit crackled to life, confirming the alert. Moss looked torn between pursuing his suspicions and responding to the potentially more significant threat. "We'll continue this later, Brannigan," he said eventually, jabbing a finger at Cale's chest. "Keep your door unlocked." "That's an order." As they hurried away, Cale closed the door and leaned against it, heart pounding. Lyra emerged from her hiding place, her luminescent patterns pulsing rapidly with what Cale now recognized as anxiety. "Not safe," she said simply, her limited vocabulary still able to convey her understanding of the situation. "No," Cale agreed. "It's not safe. Someone reported you." Lyra's shoulders slumped. She made a motion as if to gather her few possessions. The extra clothes Cale had given her, a small object she'd fashioned from scraps that might have been a musical instrument or a tool. "Where will you go?" Cale asked, realizing with sudden clarity that he didn't want her to leave. Lyra gestured vaguely upward, then shook her head helplessly. She had nowhere. "Stay," Cale said firmly. "We'll be more careful. I'll figure something out." The relief in her eyes was unmistakable, but so was the fear. She approached Cale slowly and, in a gesture that had become a form of communication between them, gently touched his hand. This time, her fingers lingered, twining briefly with his. "Thank you," she whispered. "Cale." "Good." In that moment, despite the danger, despite the uncertainty of what would come next, Cale felt something he hadn't experienced in years. A connection to another being, tenuous but real. He'd risked everything to help Lyra, and now he realized he would risk even more to keep her safe. The next few weeks brought increased scrutiny. Cale noticed security drones lingering near his housing unit, scanning teams randomly, appearing in his work zones, coworkers watching him with suspicious eyes. The pressure was constant but subtle, not enough to confront directly, but impossible to ignore. Lyra remained hidden in Cale's unit most times, venturing out only during third shift when the corridors were nearly empty. Her presence had transformed the sterile living space. The hydroponics shelf now burst with life, not just the original basil and mint, but strange luminescent plants that Lyra had somehow coaxed from seed stock Cale didn't recognize. She had arranged his tools in a spiral pattern that initially irritated him until he realized it actually made them more accessible. Small, intricate sculptures made from discarded metal parts appeared on surfaces, beautiful abstract forms that seemed to change slightly depending on the angle from which they were viewed. Most significantly, Kale found himself talking more than he had in years. He told Lyra about his daily challenges with the station's aging infrastructure, about the politics between departments, about the small moments of beauty he sometimes glimpsed through viewports, a particularly striking stellar formation, the drift of space dust catching light. She listened with rapt attention, asking questions when her vocabulary permitted, encouraging him through gestures when words failed. In return, Lyra began to share fragments of her own story. Her language skills improved rapidly. Though her speech retained a musical quality, consonants softened, vowels extended. She came from a world with 2 suns, she explained, where her people lived in harmony with a complex ecosystem they helped cultivate. They were stewards and healers, with an intimate connection to energy fields that humans might call life force. Her people had no name for themselves that translated to human language. The closest approximation was those who nurture the flow. But that world was gone now, destroyed in what Lyra could only describe as the Great Severing. A warlike species had coveted the resources of her planet, particularly crystals that channeled energy in ways their technology could utilize. They hadn't bothered with diplomacy or even formal conquest. They had simply begun harvesting, their massive machines tearing into the planet's crust, disrupting the delicate balance her people had maintained for millennia. My family, all families, try to heal the wounds, Lyra explained one night, violet eyes distant with memory. But too many, too deep. Planet began to die. Energy patterns distorted. She described a desperate evacuation, her people scattered across whatever vessels could be found. She had been separated from her family group, ending up on a transport ship bound for a mining outpost, Vesper 3. But upon arrival, she had found only fear and hostility, forcing her into hiding. Humans see difference, feel fear, she said, touching her silvery skin. Understand. Same on my world with strangers. Kale thought about her words long after she had fallen asleep that night. How easily fear of the unknown turned to hostility. How quickly the different became the dangerous. He had been guilty of the same, closing himself off after losing his family, seeing only potential pain in new connections. Yet here he was, sharing his space and increasingly his life with someone who couldn't be more different from him physically. Somewhere along the way, those differences had ceased to matter. When he looked at Lyra now, he didn't see an alien. He saw simply Lyra, with her quiet strength, her gentle touch, her determination to create beauty even in the harshest circumstances. The station-wide alarm jolted Kale from sleep, its pulsing red glow and piercing wail indicating a critical system failure. Beside him on the couch where they had fallen asleep watching old Earth-nature documentaries, Lyra bolted upright, her biological patterns flaring with alarm. "What happening?" she gasped, hands over her sensitive ears. "Critical failure," Kale explained, already pulling on his work uniform. "I need to report to engineering." Across all comm channels, the automated emergency system delivered the grim news. The primary life support matrix was failing. Core temperature regulation, atmosphere recycling, radiation shielding, all the essential systems that kept Vesper 3's residents alive in the hostile vacuum of space were showing cascading failures. "Stay here," Kale told Lyra firmly. "Lock the door. Don't let anyone in except me." But Lyra shook her head, gripping his arm. "What failing? Maybe I help." "Too dangerous," Kale insisted. "If security finds you during an emergency." "Life support failing more dangerous," she countered, her expression resolute. "I know energy patterns. Maybe see what humans cannot." The urgency of the situation made the decision for him. If the life support systems completely failed, it wouldn't matter if Lyra was discovered. Everyone on the station would be dead within hours. "Stay close to me," he conceded. "If I say run, you run back here." "Understand." Lyra nodded, pulling on a hooded station jumpsuit Kale had procured for her. With the hood up and her head down, she might pass for human in the chaos of an emergency. They made their way through corridors already growing colder as climate control fluctuated. Emergency crews rushed past, barely sparing them a glance. The normal strict security protocols had given way to the more pressing need to prevent catastrophic failure. The main engineering bay was chaos incarnate. Chief Engineer Yulsun bellowed orders over the cacophony of alarms and voices. Engineers and technicians swarmed over the exposed core of the life support matrix, a massive crystalline structure housed in a transparent vacuum chamber at the center of the room. The crystal, normally a steady blue-white glow, now pulsed erratically with sickly yellow and red flares. Brannigan, about time. Yulsun spotted Kale and waved him over. We've got degradation in the harmonic resonance patterns. The auxiliary crystals aren't synchronizing properly, and the whole matrix is destabilizing. Kale joined a team working on the control interface, but his attention was on Lyra, who stood transfixed at the edge of the room, staring at the failing crystal matrix with an expression of profound concentration. Her head was tilted slightly, as if listening to something no one else could hear. We've tried recalibrating the energy flow, a senior engineer was saying, but the desynchronization keeps spreading to new nodes. It's like the crystal is rejecting our inputs. What about a full shutdown and restart? Someone suggested. Impossible without killing everyone on board, Yulsun snapped. The backup systems can't handle full load for the time that would take. Kale felt a tug on his sleeve. Lyra had appeared at his side, her violet eyes wide with urgency. I see problem, she whispered. Crystal song. Discordant. Wrong harmony. What are you talking about? Kale whispered back, aware of curious glances from nearby engineers. Lyra struggled to explain, her limited vocabulary inadequate for complex concepts. Frustrated, she grabbed Kale's tablet and quickly sketched a diagram. Flowing lines representing energy currents, nodes where they intersected, and what appeared to be areas of blockage or distortion. Here, and here, she pointed. Energy should flow like river. Now trapped, backing up, fighting itself. Kale studied the diagram. It didn't match any of the standard engineering schematics he knew, yet something about it resonated with his understanding of the system. It was as if Lyra was seeing the same problem, but from an entirely different perspective, one that perhaps better matched the organic nature of crystal technology. Chief, he called to Yulsun, making a split-second decision. I think I see the problem. He showed Yulsun the diagram, explaining it as if it were his own insight. The resonance isn't failing because of external factors. It's an internal harmonic disruption. We're trying to force the energy flow through these standard channels. But what if the crystal's natural energy patterns have shifted? Yulsun frowned at the diagram. This doesn't match any resonance pattern I've ever seen. The crystals are semi-organic, Kale pressed. What if they've grown adapted? We're using the same resonance configuration that was set up 15 years ago when the matrix was installed. A junior engineer looked up from her console. You might be right, Chief. I'm detecting subtle structural changes in the secondary nodal points. They don't match the original specifications anymore. Yulsun hesitated, glancing at the pulsing, unstable crystal and the rapidly declining life support metrics. They were running out of options and time. What's your proposal, Brannigan? Kale looked to Lyra, who had sketched another diagram showing a different configuration of energy flows. He described a recalibration of the resonance inducers to match what she had drawn, a pattern that worked with rather than against the crystal's apparent new structure. It's unorthodox, he admitted, but the conventional approach isn't working. After a moment of tense deliberation, Yulsun gave the order to implement Kale's suggestion. Engineers scrambled to reconfigure the resonance inducers according to the new pattern. For several agonizing minutes, nothing seemed to change. The crystal continued its erratic pulsing, and the life support metrics continued their decline. Then Lyra stepped forward, moving before Kale could stop her. She approached the transparent housing of the crystal matrix, placing her palms against it. Her biological patterns began to pulse in rhythm, a counterpoint to the crystal's chaotic fluctuations. Hey, get away from there! Yulsun shouted. But everyone froze as something extraordinary happened. The crystal's pulsing began to shift, its erratic flares gradually synchronizing with the steady rhythm of Lyra's bioluminescent patterns. The sickly red and yellow hues faded, replaced by deepening blues and purples that more closely match the crystal's normal state. The resonance is stabilizing, someone reported in disbelief. Harmonic integrity improving across all nodes. Life support metrics returning to acceptable parameters, another confirmed. For nearly 10 minutes, Lyra remained connected to the crystal, her eyes closed in concentration, her patterns pulsing in that steady, harmonizing rhythm. Gradually, the crystal returned to its normal blue-white glow, its energy flowing in smooth, stable patterns visible even to the naked eye. When she finally stepped back, Lyra swayed with exhaustion. Kale moved quickly to support her, but not before everyone in the engineering bay had gotten a clear look at her distinctly non-human features. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the now normal hum of the functioning crystal matrix. Then, Chief Yule's son stepped forward, his weathered face unreadable. "What," he said slowly, "just happened here? And who or what is this?" Before Kale could answer, the doors to the engineering bay slid open with a hiss. Station Administrator Eliza Croft entered, flanked by security officers and Warden Moss, whose expression combined vindication with alarm. "I want an explanation," Administrator Croft demanded, her gaze fixed on Lyra, "and I want it now." The aftermath of the life support crisis unfolded in the station's main conference room, where senior staff gathered around a long table with Administrator Croft at its head. Kale and Lyra sat side by side, surrounded by security personnel at a respectful but unmistakable distance. Chief Yule's son had provided a technical account of what had transpired. The critical failure, the unsuccessful conventional attempts at repair, and the extraordinary intervention that had saved the station. He had been careful to attribute the initial diagnostic insight to Kale, but there was no hiding the role Lyra had played in the final stabilization. "So," Administrator Croft said, her steely gaze fixed on Lyra, "you possess some ability to interface with our crystal technology. An ability we lack." Lyra, still weakened from her effort but determined to speak for herself, nodded. "My people, we understand energy flows. The crystals, they're alive in their way. They have patterns, songs. Your machines, force patterns. Sometimes crystals change, grow, need new songs. And this is what you did. You gave our matrix a new song." The skepticism in Croft's voice was evident. "Harmonized," Lyra corrected gently. "Listen to crystal's new pattern. Help to find balance again." Scientific Officer Dr. Helena Ray leaned forward, fascination overcoming caution. "The implications are extraordinary. If you could teach us this technique." "She's not a research subject," Kale interrupted sharply. "She's a refugee. Her world was destroyed by people who wanted to exploit her people's connection to crystal energy." Warden Moss scoffed. "Convenient story. More likely she's a corporate spy, sent to infiltrate our operation. These mining conglomerates are always looking for an edge in crystal tech. She was starving in the black market when I found her," Kale countered. "Some spy." Administrator Croft raised a hand for silence. "The immediate question is what to do now. This unauthorized alien presence represents a significant security breach, regardless of the service provided today." "Service?" Kale couldn't keep the anger from his voice. "She saved everyone on this station. Without her, we'd all be dead or evacuating to emergency shelters right now. Which doesn't change the fact that you harbored an unauthorized alien, Engineer Brannigan," Croft replied coolly. "A violation that typically results in immediate termination and possible criminal charges." The room fell silent. Lyra's hand found Kale's beneath the table, her touch conveying both comfort and apology. "However," Croft continued after a moment, "these are not typical circumstances. The station's safety must remain my primary concern." She turned her attention fully to Lyra. "You obviously possess knowledge and abilities valuable to this station. The board might consider a formal arrangement. You would be provided authorized quarters, basic necessities, medical care, in exchange for your assistance with our crystal technologies. Under supervision, of course, Moss added quickly, and a full medical examination to ensure she poses no biohazard risk. Kale felt Lyra tense beside him. Her patterns dimmed slightly, a reaction he had come to recognize as distress. "Administrator Croft," he said, choosing his words carefully, "Lyra is not a tool or a resource to be exploited. She's a person who has already suffered greatly. If your offer amounts to making her a research subject or a technical asset under constant supervision, I suspect she would rather take her chances elsewhere." "Is there an elsewhere, Engineer Brannigan?" Croft asked pointedly. "As I understand it, refugee transports are few and far between in this sector." A voice from the doorway interrupted the tense exchange. "Actually, there's a transport scheduled to dock within the week." All heads turned to see Operations Manager Vahan Mehta enter the conference room, datapad in hand. Unlike most of the senior staff, Mehta had a reputation for fairness and compassion, rare qualities on a mining outpost where efficiency typically trumped humanity. "The TS Horizon is making a supply run through this sector," Mehta continued. "According to their manifest, they have authorization to transport refugees to the Coalition's sanctuary on Europa. They've done it before with displaced persons from the Ganymede conflict." Lyra looked to Kale, a question in her violet eyes. "A pathway to safety, away from Vesper 3, away from the suspicion and barely contained hostility. Away from him." Administrator Croft considered this new information. "Very well. That provides us with an alternative. The alien. Her name is Lyra." Kale interjected firmly. "Lyra," Croft amended with a slight narrowing of her eyes, "can remain under restricted supervision until the transport arrives. Then she will be transferred to their custody for relocation to Europa." "And Engineer Brannigan?" Chief Yulsun asked. "What about his violations?" Croft's expression was calculating. "Given the positive outcome of his actions, I'm inclined to issue a formal reprimand rather than termination. Probationary status for 6 months. The board will likely agree, considering the circumstances." The meeting concluded with details of Lyra's temporary status being arranged. She would be housed in a secured guest quarter, monitored but not confined, with limited access to common areas. Kale would be permitted supervised visits as her primary point of contact on the station. As they were escorted from the conference room, Lyra whispered to Kale, "Safe place on Europa." "Good for me, yes." He nodded, unable to articulate the complex emotions her potential departure stirred in him. "Yes, it's supposed to be a good place. They help people like you, refugees, people who've lost their homes." She studied his face with those perceptive violet eyes. "But you sad. I just want what's best for you," he replied, the words inadequate for the depth of his feeling. Lyra's patterns brightened briefly as she touched his hand. "You're good, Kale. You saved me. Now I saved others." Her expression grew thoughtful. "But must I go?" The days that followed brought an unexpected shift in the station's atmosphere. Word of Lyra's role in averting catastrophe spread quickly through Vesper 3's population. While some residents maintained their distance, eyeing her with suspicion or discomfort, others approached with cautious gratitude. An elderly hydroponics technician stopped Lyra in the corridor to press a small pot containing a rare flowering plant into her hands. "For what you did," she said simply before hurrying away. A group of maintenance workers nodded respectfully when Lyra passed them in the commons area. A child, ignoring her mother's attempt to pull her away, presented Lyra with a crude drawing of the crystal matrix surrounded by silver stars that were clearly meant to be Lyra's bioluminescent patterns. Kale witnessed these small gestures with a mixture of surprise and pride. Vesper 3 had always been a hard place, its residents focused on survival rather than connection. Yet adversity had created its own form of community, people who understood the fragility of life in space and valued those who preserved it, regardless of their origin. Not everyone was won over, of course. Warden Moss and his security team maintained their vigilance, watching Lyra's every move with barely concealed mistrust. Some residents deliberately changed direction when they saw her approaching. Dr. Ray, the station's lead scientist, continually pressed for just a few tests to better understand Lyra's abilities, her enthusiasm bordering on obsession. Through it all, Kale remained Lyra's constant ally, visiting her temporary quarters daily, bringing small comforts to make the sterile space more welcoming. During their permitted excursions to the commons area, he served as both guide and buffer, introducing her to those who seemed receptive, steering her away from potential confrontations. It was during one such visit, 5 days after the crisis, that Lyra truly began to open up about her past. They sat in a quiet corner of the biodome, the closest thing Vesper 3 had to a natural environment, with its carefully cultivated plants and small pond. Here, with the sound of recycled water trickling over arranged stones, Lyra seemed more at ease than anywhere else on the station. "My true name," she said softly, her fingers trailing in the pond water, "cannot be spoken in your language. The closest meaning would be she who harmonizes discordant flows." "That's beautiful," Kale said. "It suits you. Names have power for my people. They're not just what we are called, but what we are meant to be." She looked up at him, violet eyes reflecting the biodome's soft lighting. "I was training to be a harmonizer, one who helps maintain the energy balance of our world when the invaders came." Her patterns dimmed as she spoke of the destruction. The invaders, a species she could not name in human terms, had possessed technology that could extract and harness crystal energy on an industrial scale. They had not been interested in cooperation or even conquest. They had simply begun harvesting, indifferent to the devastation their methods caused. "The great crystals were connected to all life on our world," Lyra explained. "When they began to shatter, everything started to die. The air, the water, the plants, the soil, all poisoned by disrupted energy." Her family had been among those trying to heal the damage, working desperately to stabilize the remaining crystal nodes. But the invaders' machinery had triggered a catastrophic chain reaction, a cascading resonance failure, similar to what had nearly happened on Vesper 3, but on a planetary scale. "I was separated from my family group during evacuation," she said, her voice steady despite the pain evident in her dimmed patterns. "Many ships, going many directions. Confusion, fear. I found place on small transport. Others like me at first, but..." She trailed off. "What happened to them?" Kale asked gently. "Some died on journey. Long travel, not enough supplies. Some left at other outposts. By time we reached Vesper 3, only me." She looked down at her silvery hands. "Captain said better chance here than continuing. More resources. But when people see me..." Kale nodded, understanding. Fear of the unknown, of difference. The same fear that had initially made him hesitate to help her. "Have you tried to find out what happened to your family?" "Well, they might have gone," he asked. Lyra shook her head. "No way to know. No communications that reach so far. Maybe Europa has better systems? Maybe from there." The hope in her voice was fragile but present. Kale found himself both wanting that hope for her and dreading what it might mean. Her leaving not just Vesper 3, but leaving the known regions entirely in search of her people. His thoughts must have shown on his face, because Lyra reached out to touch his cheek, a gesture of intimacy she had never attempted before. Her fingertips were cool and slightly textured, like silk over marble. "Kale worries," she said softly. "I just want you to be safe," he replied. It was true, but incomplete. He wanted her safe, yes, but he also wanted her near. In the short time since he'd found her huddled in the market, Lyra had awakened something in him he'd thought long dead. The capacity to care deeply for another being, to feel joy in their presence, pain at the thought of their absence. Safe is, Lyra seemed to search for the right words. Safe is not only place or condition. Safe is also connection, belonging. Her patterns brightened as she looked at him. "You make me feel safe, Kale." The simple truth of her statement struck him deeply. When had he last been that for anyone? When had he last allowed anyone to be that for him? Before he could respond, a soft chime sounded from his comm unit, a notification that their permitted time in the biodome was ending. Security would arrive soon to escort Lyra back to her temporary quarters. As they stood to leave, Lyra suddenly swayed, her hand going to her temple, her patterns flickering erratically. "What's wrong?" Kale asked, alarmed. "Pain," she whispered. "Here." She touched the side of her head. "Since helping Crystal, getting stronger." Kale helped her to a bench, concerned by the pallor that had overtaken her silvery complexion. "You need medical attention." "Doctor Rey." "No," Lyra said firmly, despite her evident discomfort. "No tests. Will pass. Always does." "This has happened before?" Kale asked, frowning. "After helping Crystal. Small pains. This one, stronger." Kale was about to insist on medical help when Warden Moss and a security officer entered the biodome. "Time's up," Moss announced, his tone making it clear he took no pleasure in playing escort, but would tolerate no resistance. Lyra straightened, visibly forcing herself to appear normal. "I am ready," she said, her voice steadier than her slightly uneven gait as they left the biodome. That night, alone in his quarters for the first time in weeks, Kale couldn't sleep. He kept seeing Lyra's momentary weakness, the flicker of her patterns, the pain in her eyes that she had tried to hide. Had her intervention with the crystal matrix harmed her somehow? Was she suffering consequences that she concealed for fear of being subjected to invasive examinations? The thought of her in pain, alone in the sterile guest quarters under constant surveillance, was unbearable. Nearly as unbearable was the thought of her leaving on a refugee transport in just 2 days' time, disappearing from his life as suddenly as she had entered it. Kale rose and paced his small quarters, which seemed emptier now without Lyra's presence. The hydroponics shelf still flourished with the plants she had tended. The small sculpture she had created still adorned his workbench. Everywhere he looked, he saw evidence of how thoroughly she had transformed his space and, more significantly, his life. When morning came, Kale made a decision. He requested an urgent meeting with Administrator Croft, bypassing the usual channels. Whatever happened next, he would not simply stand by and watch events unfold without taking action. Administrator Croft received him in her office, a space as austere and formal as the woman herself. She listened without interruption as Kale presented his case, that forcing Lyra onto a refugee transport might not be in her best interests or, he argued, the station's. "She possesses knowledge that could revolutionize our crystal technology," he pointed out, appealing to Croft's practical nature. "But more importantly, she's a person who has already lost everything once. Sending her away against her would be cruel." "Against her will?" Croft raised an eyebrow. "She has expressed no objection to the arrangement with the Horizon." "Because she doesn't believe she has a choice," Kale countered. "She's been running and hiding since she arrived here. The first kindness she experienced was when I offered her shelter. Now she's being told she can either submit to restrictive monitoring here or be shipped off to strangers." "What exactly are you proposing, Engineer Brannigan?" "Let her stay, but as a resident, not a research subject or monitored alien. I'll vouch for her, take responsibility." Kale took a deep breath before adding, "And if that's not acceptable, then I'll leave with her. I have engineering skills that would be valuable on Europa." The declaration surprised even him, but as soon as the words left his mouth, Kale knew they were true. He had spent years on Vesper, 3 rebuilding machinery, but never rebuilding his life. Perhaps it was time for both him and Lyra to find a new beginning, whether here or elsewhere. Administrator Croft studied him with calculating eyes. "You would jeopardize your position, your career, for this alien?" "For Lyra," Kale corrected firmly. "And yes, I would." A long silence followed as Croft considered. Finally, she leaned back in her chair. "The board is divided on this matter. Some see only potential security risks. Others recognize the value of Lyra's abilities, particularly after what happened with the crystal matrix." She tapped a stylus against her desk thoughtfully. "And there is the matter of public opinion. Word of her intervention has spread. Forcing her to leave after she saved the station would not be politically expedient." Hope flickered in Kale's chest. "So she can stay as a resident. With conditions," Croft cautioned. "She would need a permanent sponsor, someone legally responsible for her integration and conduct. There would be restrictions on her access to critical systems, at least initially, and she would need to contribute to the station in some capacity. "I'll be your sponsor," Kale said without hesitation. "And she has more to contribute than you know. Her understanding of organic systems, her ability to harmonize energy patterns. These are just the beginning." Croft nodded slowly. "I will take your proposal to the board. In the meantime, the arrangement with the Horizon remains in place. If the board rejects your petition, Lyra will depart as scheduled." It wasn't the definitive answer Kale had hoped for, but it was a possibility where none had existed before. He left the administrator's office with cautious optimism, heading directly to Lyra's temporary quarters to share the news. He found her standing by the small viewport, watching the distant stars. She turned at his entrance, and Kale was immediately concerned by her appearance. The luminescent patterns on her skin were pulsing irregularly, and a fine sheen of moisture covered her brow. "Lyra, are you all right?" She smiled weakly. "Better now. Seeing you helps. The headaches, they're getting worse, aren't they?" She didn't deny it. "Energy here, different from my world. Helping Crystal took much strength." She made a dismissive gesture. "We'll adapt. Always have." Kale wasn't convinced, but he set his concern aside momentarily to share his conversation with Administrator Croft. Lyra listened with growing wonder as he explained his proposal, that she could potentially stay on Vesper 3 not as a monitored alien, but as a resident with rights and responsibilities. "You would do this?" she asked when he finished. "Be responsible for me?" "If you want to stay," Kale said carefully. "The transport to Europa is still an option. It might be safer there, more accepting. But if you choose to remain here..." He paused, gathering courage. "I would like you to stay." Lyra's patterns brightened dramatically, pulsing in a rhythm Kale had come to associate with joy or excitement. "I would like to stay also," she said softly. "With you." The simple declaration filled Kale with a warmth he hadn't felt in years. He reached for her hand, and she twined her fingers with his, the now familiar gesture somehow more significant in this moment of choice and acknowledgement. Their moment was interrupted by an urgent chime from the station's communication system. Administrator Croft's voice filled the room. "All senior staff and department heads to the main conference room immediately." "Repeat. All senior staff and department heads to the main conference room." Kale frowned. "That includes me. I have to go." "Something wrong?" Lyra asked, concern evident in her voice. "I don't know, but I'll come back as soon as I can. We'll talk more then." As he turned to leave, Lyra caught his hand once more. "Kale," she said, her violet eyes intense. "Whatever happens, thank you. For everything." Something in her tone, a note of finality, unsettled him. But the insistent repeat of Croft's summons left no time to question it. With a reassuring smile he didn't entirely feel, Kale hurried to the conference room. The atmosphere in the conference room was tense. Department heads and senior staff spoke in hushed clusters, speculation running rampant until Administrator Croft entered and called the meeting to order. "The situation is straightforward," she began without preamble. "The TS Horizon has made contact earlier than expected. They have diverted their course due to reports of increased pirate activity in the Outer Belt. They will dock tomorrow morning rather than the day after, and remain for only 6 hours. Just long enough to offload essential supplies and take on their designated passengers." Kale felt his stomach drop. What about the board's decision regarding Lyra's resident status? Croft's expression was carefully neutral. "The board has not yet convened on the matter. Given the accelerated timeline, they will not be able to before the Horizon's departure. So Lyra is still expected to leave?" Kale pressed. "The arrangement stands, Engineer Brannigan. Unless the board decides otherwise, which now seems unlikely before the transport's arrival." Chief Yulsun cleared his throat. "With respect, Administrator, couldn't we request the Horizon delay specifically for this matter? Given the service Lyra provided to the station." "The Horizon operates on Coalition authority, not ours," Croft interrupted. "They set their schedule based on security assessments we are not privy to. They have already made one alteration. They will not make another for a single passenger." The meeting continued with logistical details of the Horizon's abbreviated docking, but Kale barely heard them. His mind raced with alternatives, each less viable than the last. Could he convince Lyra to hide until the transport left? No. Security would be on high alert, and being discovered would only make her situation worse. Could he appeal directly to the Horizon's captain? Unlikely to succeed where Administrator Croft had no jurisdiction. Or should he simply leave with her, as he had impulsively suggested to Croft? The thought of abandoning his life on Vesper 3 was daunting, yet the prospect of returning to his solitary existence after knowing Lyra seemed equally impossible. As the meeting concluded, Kale approached Administrator Croft directly. "Please," he said quietly, "there must be something we can do. At least grant her the dignity of choice." Croft regarded him with what might have been sympathy, unexpected from a usually stoic administrator. "The board convenes in 3 days, Brannigan. That's the soonest a formal decision could be made. I cannot hold a transport against coalition directives." "Then let me go with her," Kale said, the decision crystallizing in his mind. "Process my departure authorization along with hers." Croft's eyebrows rose slightly. "You're serious about this?" "Completely." She studied him for a long moment. "I'll have personnel prepare the documentation, but I recommend you consider carefully what you're leaving behind and what you might be facing. Europa is not a vacation destination, engineer. It's a frontier outpost with its own harsh realities." "I understand," Kale said, though in truth he had only the vaguest idea of what life on Europa entailed. All he knew with certainty was that it would include Lyra, and somehow that made the unknown seem less daunting. When Kale returned to Lyra's quarters to share the news, he found her condition had worsened. She sat on the edge of her bed, head in her hands, her bioluminescent patterns flickering weakly. "Lyra," he rushed to her side. "We need to get you medical attention." "No," she insisted, though her voice was strained. "Not safe. Now understand. This isn't normal," Kale argued. "Whatever's happening to you is happening because of me," she finished, looking up at him with pain-glazed eyes. "When helped Crystal, open myself too much. Station energy patterns flooding in, too different from home. Too mechanical." Understanding dawned. "You're having some kind of reaction to our technology? Our energy systems?" She nodded weakly. "My people, sensitive to energy harmonics. Hear all wrong frequencies. Like constant noise. Helping Crystal made connection stronger. Now cannot shield properly. The Horizon arrives tomorrow," Kale told her. "I've arranged to go with you, once we're away from the station." "No," Lyra said, with unexpected firmness. "You cannot leave your home for me. Vesper 3 is where I work, not my home," Kale countered. "Not really. Not anymore." Lyra's expression softened. "Became your home again. Because of me?" The question caught him off guard with its insight. It was true. Somewhere in these weeks of protecting Lyra, of seeing the station through her eyes, of connecting with others over her welfare, Vesper 3 had begun to feel like a community again rather than merely a workplace. "I'm still coming with you," he insisted. "My mind is made up." Lyra shook her head, wincing at the movement. "Kale has place here. Important work. People who need him." She placed a hand over his heart. Found connection again. Should not break. Before he could argue further, Lyra was seized by a spasm of pain, her patterns flaring brightly, then dimming alarmingly. Kale caught her as she slumped forward, her skin burning hot beneath his hands. This time he would not be deterred. He activated his comm unit. "Medical emergency in guest quarters C-17. I need Dr. Ray immediately." Within minutes, Dr. Ray arrived with a medical team. The scientist's initial excitement at examining Lyra quickly gave way to professional concern as she registered the alien's deteriorating condition. "Her neurological readings are off the charts," Ray reported after scanning Lyra with various instruments. "It's as if her nervous system is processing an enormous amount of external stimuli simultaneously. The closest human equivalent would be extreme sensory overload, but magnified 100-fold. The crystal matrix opened her too much to it." Ray's eyes widened with comprehension. Of course, if her species evolved with an innate sensitivity to energy fields, our artificial environment would be like constant static electricity to her. And interfacing directly with the crystal matrix would have heightened that sensitivity exponentially. She adjusted settings on a medical device. I can administer a neural suppressant that might help dampen the input temporarily, but it's not a permanent solution. The transport leaves tomorrow, Kale said, if we can just get her stabilized enough for the journey. This level of neural stress could cause permanent damage long before then, Ray cautioned. Unless, she trailed off, thinking intensely. Unless what? Kale prompted. The biodome, Ray said slowly. It's the least technologically dense area of the station. More organic material, fewer power conduits, and electronic systems. The plant life might even help buffer some of the artificial energy patterns. It made sense. Lyra had always seemed most at ease in the biodome, and her connection to plant life had been evident from the beginning with his hydroponics shelf. Can we move her there? Kale asked. Ray nodded. I'll clear it with Administrator Croft. Medical necessity. In the meantime, I'll administer a mild sedative to help her rest. As the medical team prepared Lyra for transfer, she drifted in and out of consciousness. During one lucid moment, she gripped Kale's hand weakly. Sorry, she whispered. Did not want to be burden. You're not a burden, Kale assured her, his throat tight with emotion. You never were. We're going to help you through this, and tomorrow we'll both leave on the horizon. Together. Her patterns brightened briefly in acknowledgement before she slipped back into sedated rest. The biodome transformation was accomplished with remarkable efficiency, testament to the station's capacity for action in a crisis. Under Dr. Ray's direction, a secluded section was rapidly converted into a temporary medical space with minimal technological footprint. Monitoring equipment was kept to the absolute essentials, powered by isolated batteries rather than station systems to reduce electromagnetic interference. Kale worked alongside the medical team, his engineering expertise proving valuable as they modified the space. He carefully transplanted several of the plants Lyra had tended in his quarters to the area around her bed, hoping the familiar energy signatures might provide some comfort. By nightfall, Lyra lay in the prepared space, surrounded by the biodome's densest vegetation. The luminescent patterns on her skin still flickered irregularly, but with less intensity than before. Her breathing had steadied, and the pain crease between her brows had relaxed somewhat. Dr. Ray checked the minimal monitoring equipment. Her neural activity is still elevated, but no longer in the dangerous range. The organic buffer seems to be helping. Will she be stable enough for transport tomorrow? Kale asked. It's difficult to say with certainty, Ray admitted. We've never treated her species before. But if she continues to improve at this rate, and if we can create a similarly buffered environment for the journey, I believe it's possible. Kale nodded, relief washing through him. Thank you, Doctor, for everything. Ray's expression turned thoughtful. You know, in all my years of xenobiology research, I've never encountered a species with this particular sensitivity to energy fields. The applications for crystal technology alone could revolutionize our approach. She noticed Kale's wary expression and added quickly, not that I'm suggesting we use her as a research subject, but a collaborative approach on her terms could benefit both our peoples. If she chooses to return someday, perhaps, Kale said diplomatically. But for now, her health and freedom are what matter. Ray nodded in understanding. I'll leave you with her. Call immediately if there's any change. As the doctor departed, Kale settled into a chair beside Lyra's bed. In the soft bioluminescence of specially cultivated plants, her silver skin seemed to glow with an inner light. Despite her weakened state, she possessed an ethereal beauty that still took his breath away. He must have dozed off because he woke to the feel of cool fingers against his cheek. Lyra was awake, her violet eyes clear for the first time in days. Better, she said softly. Much better here. Kale took her hand in his. How do you feel? Like self again. Energy here. She gestured to the plants surrounding them. Clean. Harmonious. Helps shield from station noise. Dr. Ray thinks we can create something similar for the journey tomorrow, Kale told her. A protected space on the transport. Lyra nodded, but something in her expression gave Kale pause. What is it? He asked. She looked around at the lush vegetation, then back. To him. Had idea while sleeping. Dream maybe, but clear now. She sat up slowly, her movements careful, but no longer pained. What if? Not go to Europa. You want to stay? Kale couldn't keep the hope from his voice. Yes, but not in quarters. Not near technology. She gestured to their surroundings. Here, in Biodome. The idea was so simple, yet so perfect that Kale was momentarily stunned. You could live in the Biodome, he repeated, where the station's energy patterns are buffered by organic life. Lyra nodded eagerly. Could help too. Make plants grow better. Understand their needs. Already see ways to improve. She pointed to several areas where the vegetation seemed less robust. Energy flows wrong there. Can't fix. The possibilities unfolded in Kale's mind. The biodome was essential to the station's long-term sustainability, providing supplemental oxygen and fresh produce that reduced dependency on shipments. If Lyra could enhance its productivity, that alone would be a valuable contribution to station life. We need to create proper living space for you here, he said, mind already working on the practical aspects, and convince Administrator Croft and the board. Worth trying? Lyra asked, watching his face carefully. Absolutely worth trying, Kale assured her. He activated his comm unit. This is Engineer Brannigan. I need to speak with Administrator Croft immediately. It's about Lyra, and I believe we've found a solution. The morning of the Horizon's arrival dawned with a station-wide announcement. The board had convened an emergency session and issued a provisional ruling. Lyra would be permitted to remain on Vesper 3 as a resident alien with protected status, under the dual sponsorship of Engineer Kale Brannigan and Dr. Helena Ray. Her primary residence would be within the biodome, where she would serve as a botanical specialist, and she would work with the engineering department as a consultant on crystal technology when her health permitted. The decision had not been unanimous, but the practical benefits, combined with the growing public support for the alien who had saved the station, had swayed enough board members to secure the necessary votes. The provisional status would be reviewed after 6 months, with the potential for permanent residency if the arrangement proved successful. Kale and Lyra stood together at the biodome's largest viewport, watching as the TS Horizon docked with Vesper 3. The transport ship was impressive, nearly twice the size of the station's largest mining vessel, its hull bearing the distinctive blue and silver markings of the Coalition. Could have been Journey to New Life, Lyra remarked, her hand finding Kale's. This is a new life, he replied, squeezing her fingers gently. For both of us. Over the past 12 hours, station personnel had worked tirelessly to transform a section of the biodome into suitable living quarters for Lyra. Using materials with minimal technological components, they had constructed a simple yet comfortable dwelling that blended harmoniously with the surrounding vegetation. Kale had personally overseen the project, ensuring that every aspect was designed to minimize the energy noise that had affected Lyra so severely. The quarters included a small workspace where Lyra could pursue her interest in station botany, already filled with samples she wanted to study. A short path connected her dwelling to the main biodome walkways, providing both privacy and accessibility. Most importantly, the area had been officially designated as Lyra's legal residence, with access protocols that respected her status as a station resident rather than a curiosity or a security concern. Still many who fear difference, Lyra acknowledged, watching as a group of station residents gave them a wide berth while passing through the biodome. Cannot change all minds. No, Kale agreed, but minds can change over time. Mine did. Lyra's patterns brightened with affection. Yes, from rescuer to friend too. She paused, searching for the right word. To someone who loves you, Kale finished quietly, the declaration both terrifying and liberating. He had not spoken those words to anyone since losing his family, had not allowed himself to feel the vulnerability they represented. Lyra's patterns pulsed with a rhythm he had never seen before, rapid, complex, luminous. Love, she repeated, testing the word. My people have similar concept. Deeper than friendship. Connection of energies, harmonizing together. She placed her hand over his heart. I feel this for you, Kale. Different species, same feeling. As the horizon began its offloading procedures, the biodome filled with more visitors than usual, some coming to see the newly created alien dwelling, others simply curious about the rare sight of a coalition transport. Kale noticed with satisfaction that the reactions to Lyra were increasingly respectful or neutral, the outright hostility diminishing. A small group approached them, Chief Yule's son, Dr. Ray, and surprisingly, Administrator Croft herself. The Horizon's captain has requested to meet the Crystal Harmonizer before departure, Croft informed them. Apparently word of your abilities has reached Coalition ears, Lyra. They're quite interested in potential applications for their crystal-based navigation systems. Is this an official request? Kale asked, instantly protective. Merely a professional courtesy, Croft assured him. No obligations attached. Though it might be politically advantageous to maintain positive relations with coalition representatives. Lyra straightened, her posture taking on a dignity that reminded Kale of how she had described her former role on her homeworld. A harmonizer, a keeper of balance. I will meet Captain, she decided. Share what knowledge is safe to share. As they made their way to the docking bay, where the Horizon's captain waited, Lyra paused briefly to touch one of her sculptures that had been installed along the biodome path. A twisting, elegant form that somehow suggested both growth and stability. What is it? Kale asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. Thinking of journey, she replied. How finding home sometimes means leaving home. She looked up at him with those deep violet eyes. Grateful my journey brought me here. To you. Kale thought of all the circumstances that had led to this moment. His impulsive decision to help a starving alien, her courageous intervention during the Crystal Crisis, their gradual building of trust and understanding. 1,000 coincidences and choices that might easily have gone differently. I'm grateful too, he said simply, taking her hand as they continued toward the future they would build together on this unlikely outpost among the stars. The docking bay hummed with activity as the Horizon's crew efficiently transferred supplies to waiting station personnel. Against this backdrop of organized chaos, Kale and Lyra met with Captain Elaine Foster, a weathered woman whose bearing spoke of decades navigating the dangerous frontier of space. So you're the Crystal Whisperer, Foster said without preamble, eyeing Lyra with professional interest rather than the suspicion or fascination she had grown accustomed to. My navigation officer nearly had a fit when he heard about what you did with the life support matrix here. Said it should have been impossible without complete recalibration of the harmonic inducers. Different approach, Lyra explained modestly. Your crystals, my people's crystals, same basic energy, different expressions. Like languages, different words, same meanings underneath. Foster nodded thoughtfully. We've got outposts pushing further into the outer rim that could benefit from that kind of expertise. If you ever reconsider your decision to stay on this rock, she glanced at Vesper 3's utilitarian architecture with mild disdain, the Coalition would welcome your consultation. Thank you, Lyra replied. Perhaps someday. For now, my place is here. As they concluded their brief meeting, Foster pulled Kale aside, while Lyra was examining a crystal-based navigation display with fascinated interest. You know, the captain said, quietly, we occasionally get transmissions from far beyond Coalition space, signals that don't match any known species profiles. Some of them have energy signatures our xenolinguists say might be compatible with what you've described of her people. Kale's heart raced. You think some of her kind might have survived? Established somewhere new? Foster shrugged. Can't say for certain. But if she ever wants to explore that possibility, have your administrator contact me directly. I've logged the information in my official report. It was a small hope, perhaps, but Kale treasured it as they bid farewell to the captain and watched as the Horizon eventually disengaged from the station, its engines flaring bright against the darkness of space before it disappeared into the distance. What did the captain tell you? Lyra asked as they returned to the biodome, her perceptiveness as keen as ever. Kale shared Foster's information, watching as Lyra absorbed the possibility that she might not be the last of her kind after all. "Hope," she said softly, her patterns pulsing with complex emotions. "Dangerous gift. Beautiful gift. Something to consider for the future," Kale agreed. "But not a decision you need to make now." They reached Lyra's new dwelling as the station's lighting began its transition to evening cycle. The structure looked even more harmonious now, settling into its surroundings as if it had always been part of the biodome. Several plants that Lyra had attended to that morning already showed signs of new growth, responding to her care in ways that defied station botanists' expectations. Inside, Kale had placed a single item from his own quarters, the hydroponic shelf that had first revealed. Lyra's gift with plants, now expanded and modified to suit her abilities. It stood as a bridge between their separate living spaces, a reminder of their beginning. "Will you stay a while?" Lyra asked, gesturing to a sitting area crafted from living plants that had been coaxed into the shape of comfortable seating, a technique from her homeworld she had begun to recreate. "I'd like that," Kale replied, settling beside her in the gentle embrace of the organic furniture. They sat in comfortable silence as the biodome's lighting dimmed further, triggering the nocturnal bioluminescence of specially cultivated plants. The effect was magical. Soft, multicolored glows pulsing in harmony with Lyra's own patterns, creating an atmosphere unlike anywhere else on the station. "It reminds me of home," Lyra said softly. "Night gardens where light plants would sing to the moons." She paused, her expression wistful, yet no longer devastated by the memory. "Cannot recreate exactly, but can make new beauty here." "You already have," Kale assured her, looking around at the transformation she had begun in just one day of official residence. Plants that had been merely surviving now thrived, their growth patterns more vibrant, their colors deeper. Even the air seemed richer somehow, carrying subtle fragrances that the station's recycled atmosphere had always lacked. A gentle chime sounded from a small communication device, one specially designed by Dr. Ray to minimize the energy noise that affected Lyra so severely. The doctor's voice came through, modified to a frequency Lyra found less jarring. "How are you settling in? Any adverse reactions to the new space?" "Very well," Lyra replied. "Feel stronger here. Clearer. Excellent. I've been analyzing your neural readings from earlier. Fascinating how quickly you responded to the organic buffer. I'd like to discuss some theories when you're feeling up to it." Kale noticed the genuine enthusiasm in Ray's voice. Not the cold interest of a scientist studying a specimen, but the warm excitement of a colleague discovering new possibilities. It was yet another small but significant shift in how Lyra was perceived on the station. After concluding the call, Lyra turned to Kale with a thoughtful expression. "Dr. Ray has good heart under scientist exterior. Wants knowledge, yes, but also wants to help. She was one of the strongest advocates for your residency petition," Kale confirmed. "I think she sees the potential for mutual benefit in understanding your connection to energy fields." "Yes, we'll work with her. Carefully. Some knowledge. Dangerous in wrong hands." Lyra's patterns dimmed slightly. "My world learned this too late." Kale nodded in understanding. The responsibility of knowledge was something he understood as an engineer. The same principles that powered life support could, with slight modifications, become weapons. The same crystal technology that enabled navigation could be twisted to destabilize entire ecosystems. "We'll proceed at your comfort level," he assured her. "You set the boundaries." Lyra's expression brightened. "Such strange concept once, me having power to choose. To set limits. On my world, before invasion, had role, purpose, then became fugitive, survivor only. Now," she gestured to the dwelling, to the thriving plants, to Kale himself. "Now a place again. Purpose again. What you see that purpose as?" Kale asked, genuinely curious about how she envisioned her future on Vesper 3. Lyra considered the question seriously. "3 parts, I think. First, heal and protect plants here. Make biodome stronger, more productive. Station needs this." She touched a nearby frond that leaned toward her like an affectionate pet. Second, help understand crystal energy better, safer ways to use, to harmonize with technology. She paused, her violet eyes meeting his. Third, build connection between our kinds. Show not all difference is threat. Sometimes difference is strength. It was a profound vision, Kale thought, one that extended far beyond her own welfare to the betterment of the entire station. In just weeks, Lyra had evolved from a frightened refugee to a being with a clear sense of her unique contributions. Ambitious goals, he said with a smile. Have good partner, she replied simply. Makes all possible. The word partner resonated deeply with Kale. It captured what they had become to each other, beyond rescuer and refugee, beyond even friends or lovers. They were partners in the truest sense, each making the other stronger, each compensating for the other's vulnerabilities. Their conversation was interrupted by another chime, this one from Kale's standard-issue comm unit. The voice of Chief Yulsun filled the small space. Brannigan, hate to disturb your evening, but we've got a fluctuation in the secondary crystal node of Section G. Nothing critical yet, but after what happened with the main matrix, we're not taking chances. Could use your expertise. Kale sighed. Even with the crisis averted and Lyra's status resolved, the daily challenges of keeping Vesper 3 functioning continued. I'll be there in 15 minutes, he replied. As he stood to leave, Lyra rose with him. I will come too, she said decisively. Are you sure? You've only just stabilized, and the technical areas are still difficult for you. She nodded, determination in her violet eyes. Must learn to navigate stations safely. Cannot stay only in Biodome if want to be true resident. She reached for a small pouch she had crafted, filled with what appeared to be a mixture of crystal fragments and organic matter. Dr. Ray helped make this. Shield against worst energy noise. Not perfect, but helped for short times. Kale recognized the significance of her decision. She was choosing not to hide away in her sanctuary, but to engage with the wider station despite the discomfort it caused her. It was a brave step toward integration. All right, he agreed, but we go slowly, and you tell me immediately if it becomes too much. Together they moved through the station corridors, Kale watchful for any sign of distress from Lyra equally attentive to the reactions of those they passed. Some residents still stared or whispered, but others nodded in greeting, a few even offering words of welcome or thanks for her intervention during the Crystal Crisis. In Section G, Chief Yulsun raised an eyebrow at Lyra's presence, but made no objection. The fluctuation is subtle, he explained, leading them to a control panel. Barely registers on our standard diagnostics, but there's definitely something off in the harmonic pattern. Lyra approached the panel cautiously, one hand clutching her protective pouch. She closed her eyes briefly, seeming to listen to something beyond human perception. Yes, she confirmed. Disharmony. Small now, but growing. She looked at the schematic displayed on the panel. May I? At Yulsun's nod, she adjusted the display to show a different view of the crystal system, one focusing on energy flow rather than mechanical structure. With delicate movements, she traced a pattern that neither man could fully interpret. Here, she indicated, energy backing up like water behind dam, need release path. Kale studied the area she indicated, a pressure buildup in the tertiary resonance chamber, but that shouldn't be possible with the current configuration. Unless, Yulsun mused, the crystal has grown along a new axis since the last calibration. Remember what happened with the main matrix. Working together, Lyra's intuitive understanding of energy fields, Kale's technical knowledge of the system's architecture, and Yulsun's practical experience with the station's operations, they identified the issue. A crystal growth pattern had created a new energy pathway that the existing configuration hadn't accounted for, causing a gradual buildup of resonance that would eventually have led to another failure. Can adjust harmonizer here, Lyra suggested, pointing to a specific component. Small change, big difference. Yulsun looked to Kale, who nodded his agreement. Do it, the chief authorized. With careful precision, Lyra made a minor adjustment to the harmonizer settings, just enough to accommodate the crystal's natural growth without disrupting the overall system. The diagnostic displays immediately showed improvement, the fluctuation stabilizing into a healthy pattern. "Well, I'll be damned," Yulsun muttered, impressed despite himself. Fixed in 5 minutes what would have had a team working for hours. He turned to Lyra with newfound respect. "You've got a gift, no question about that." "Different perspective," Lyra corrected gently. "Not better, just different. Complementary." As they left Section G, Kale noticed Lyra's pace slowing, her patterns dimming slightly with fatigue. The technical environment was still taxing for her, shield or no shield. He guided her back toward the biodome, his arms supportive around her waist. "You did well," he told her. Yulsun isn't easily impressed. "Good first step," Lyra agreed, leaning slightly against him. "Cannot change all minds. Cannot heal all hurts, but can begin." They reached the biodome entrance, where the air already seemed fresher, less mechanically processed. Lyra straightened, drawing strength from the organic environment. "Home," she said simply, looking at the green expanse before them. Kale followed her gaze, seeing the biodome through new eyes. What had once been merely a functional component of the station's life support system had been transformed, not just by Lyra's physical changes to the plants and layout, but by the meaning it now held. It was no longer just a biodome. It was a meeting place between worlds, between different forms of life, finding common ground. "Yes," he agreed, squeezing her hand gently. "Home." 6 months passed, bringing changes both subtle and profound to life on. Vesper 3. The biodome, under Lyra's care, flourished beyond all expectations. Crop yields increased by nearly 30%, reducing the station's dependence on expensive imported foodstuffs. New varieties of plants appeared, some with enhanced oxygen production, others with unexpected medicinal properties, all thriving under Lyra's intuitive understanding of their needs. The living quarters she had begun with expanded organically, becoming a small but vibrant community as several other station residents, mostly those working in the biodome, chose to establish dwellings near hers. The area took on characteristics unlike any other section of the station, with structures that blended technology and living material in harmonious ways inspired by what Lyra remembered of her homeworld's architecture. Kale maintained his official quarters in Section D, but spent most of his time in the biodome dwelling he and Lyra had expanded together. As his relationship with Lyra deepened, so too did his connection to the wider station community. The isolation he had chosen after losing his family gradually gave way to a cautious but genuine re-engagement with others. Lyra's integration had not been without challenges. Warden Moss and a vocal minority still regarded her with suspicion, advocating for stricter limitations on her activities and access. Occasional health episodes still occurred when she spent too long in technically dense areas of the station. The fundamental differences between her physiology and human biology created misunderstandings that required patience on all sides to resolve. Yet for each challenge, there seemed to be a corresponding breakthrough. Dr. Ray, working closely with Lyra, developed increasingly effective shields against the station's energy noise, allowing Lyra greater freedom of movement. Engineer Tashima, initially one of the most vocal opponents of Lyra's presence, became an ally after she helped diagnose a flaw in a water recycling system that had plagued his team for months. Most significantly, the crystal technology throughout Vesper 3 operated with unprecedented efficiency, thanks to regular, harmonizing sessions in which Lyra worked with the engineering team to adjust systems according to the crystal's natural growth patterns rather than forcing them into rigid configurations. These sessions, carefully timed and limited to protect Lyra's health, saved enormous resources and prevented several potential crises before they developed. When the board convened to review Lyra's provisional status, the evidence was overwhelming. Her contributions to station sustainability, safety, and scientific advancement far outweighed any concerns about security or resource allocation. With a nearly unanimous vote, they granted her permanent resident status with expanded rights and responsibilities. The evening after the board's decision, Kale and Lyra celebrated privately in their biodome dwelling. Outside, The stars were visible through the transparent dome sections, their distant light mixing with the gentle bioluminescence of the plants inside. "Did you ever imagine this?" Kale asked, "when you were hiding in that market corner, starving and afraid?" Lyra's patterns pulsed with amusement. "Never. Expected death, perhaps. Or endless running." She reached out to touch a small crystal formation they had established in their dwelling, one that resonated harmoniously with her biology while interfacing with station systems, allowing her to control her environment without the discomfort of direct exposure. "Found home instead." "Found you. We've built something good here," Kale said, looking around at their shared space, a perfect blend of his technical contributions and her organic sensibilities. "Something neither of us could have created alone." "Yes, harmony from difference." Lyra's expression turned thoughtful, thinking about Captain Foster's information more lately, about possible survivors of my kind. Kale nodded, unsurprised. As Lyra had grown more secure in her place on Vesper 3, her thoughts had increasingly turned to the wider question of her people's fate. "Do you want to try to find them?" "Not leave," she hastened to assure him, reaching for his hand. "But perhaps," send message, "Coalition has better transmission technology. Dr. Ray thinks possible to create signal my people would recognize if still exists somewhere." "I think that's a wonderful idea," Kale said, genuinely supportive. He understood better than most the importance of knowing whether one was truly alone. "We could work with Ray to design it. And who knows? Maybe someday." "Someday," Lyra agreed, the word holding both promise and acceptance. Whatever the future held, whether reunion with her kind or continued life as the sole representative of her species, she had found her place in the universe. Outside their window, a supply transport moved slowly past the station, its running lights creating brief patterns. Against the darkness, within their dwelling, plants shifted slightly toward Lyra, responsive to her presence even in stillness. The constant hum of the station's machinery seemed distant here, muffled by living matter and the careful design of their space. Kale drew Lyra close, her silvery skin cool against his, her bioluminescent patterns synchronizing with his heartbeat in a phenomenon neither of them fully understood but both treasured. They had found each other across impossible distances, different species, different worlds, different traumas, and in doing so had created something new and precious. "Whatever comes next," Kale said softly, "we face it together." Lyra nodded, her violet eyes reflecting starlight and the gentle glow of the life they had nurtured around them. She had been hungry, homeless, and alien, the ultimate outsider. He had been isolated, wounded, and withdrawn, a self-made exile. Together, they had found healing and purpose neither could have discovered alone. "Together," she agreed, the word both a promise and a celebration as they gazed out at the vast universe that had, against all odds, brought them to each other.